Testing, testing. Testing.
Yeah, okay. Hello, Zach. How you doing? All right, guys. Planning Board is now in session, and in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided. Should any member of this board have reason to believe this meeting is being held in violation of that act, they shall so state at this time. Hearing none, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, Karen?
Yes. Mr. Becerra?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Belasco?
Here.
Mr. Crowley?
Here.
Mr. Gorgon? Mayor Mullick?
Here.
Mrs. Reed? Deputy Mayor Sheehan? Mr. Lundholm?
Here.
Mr. Malloy? Mr. Produces?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the minutes of May 10th for approval.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Jones, seconded by Mr. Lundholm. Mr. Belasco?
Yes.
Mayor Mullick?
Yes.
Mr. Crowley?
Yes.
Mr. Lundholm?
Yes.
Mr. Produces?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, and I didn't motion that, by the way.
I think Mr. Crowley did.
Oh, my apologies, sorry. Mr. Crowley, okay, motion by Mr. Crowley, seconded by Mr. Lundholm. And who's left? Mr. Becerra?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we had last-minute resolutions that were sent out to everybody today. Everybody have time to look at them? Okay. We'll take them one by one. Resolution number 5-24, 2022:1, Cape Marina. Motion to adopt. Oh, hold on, Mr. Crowley, you have a comment?
I have a question.
Okay.
On that, this is a resolution adopting or acknowledging the 9-0 vote on our waiver of the site plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Crowley, can you bring your mic closer? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I do have one issue I'd like to raise on page 3, item number 3. And which says there are no stated parking requirements in the code. I think that's not quite accurate. I think there are parking requirements in the code that specify, in particular, the zoning ordinance, which talks about botels, the definition of a botel.
Well, this was what was quoted from the meeting.
I understand that, but I didn't see, I didn't realize until today that it was going to be in the resolution. This is what we,
The question is fine. I copied and pasted that from Craig's
right.
report.
And we had a discussion about whether or not that was,
There are no parking requirements for botels expressly stated in the zoning ordinance. So
Well-
we had this discussion during that meeting.
but look, can I just bring one thing to your attention and see,
Sure.
you can show me where I've made my mistake, but in the definition of a botel, it's a building containing living and sleeping accommodations for transient occupancy with accompanying dock facilities or a combination of dock and parking facilities. And then further down, a botel is categorized as, or classified as a tourist guest house under our zoning code. And then further in the zoning code, a tourist guest house is required to provide at least one parking space for each guest sleeping room, plus one space per employee for the largest shift. So, I'm a layman, but I'm thinking that our code does address parking requirements for a botel. Now, since we waived the site plan includes the provision of parking spaces, but since we waived it with the understanding that there will be no parking. These are boat-only, it's a boat-only facility. There'll be no parking spaces for
Right.
cars.
That was the discussion that we were having, is to whether, so if you go to the parking section, there is no express requirement for parking spaces for a botel.
Yeah, well, there is, because a botel,
If you go to the parking so then we had the discussion as to whether, and we wanted to verify that it was only for transient boaters. We had that discussion. So I think at that point, the board determined that there was no parking requirement necessary for this type of use.
I'm just bringing it to the board's attention now, because in the definition section 525-4,
No, he's talking about the parking section.
I'm talking about the definition of a botel.
The definition, definition is one section. Parking requirement is another section, and that's where you draw your parking, where you,
I understand that. And the definition of a botel is included in the concept of a tourist guest house, which does have parking requirements. So if a botel is a tourist guest house, the way I read the code, it has parking requirements. We may waive them.
it's probably, it's,
The definition is one thing, the parking requirement is another.
it's a theoretical thing now because we went through discussion. All we're doing is memorializing what we discussed that night.
Now, I understand that.
Okay.
I understand that
If
discussion.
another application comes up similar to this, you can raise it then.
Well, if another, this is the point I'm raising it because this is the first time we've ever had this. And if it comes up again, this becomes evidentiary support for the concept that we don't have,
It needs to be brought up at that time.
well, then we're going to have to.
We're bringing no new evidence, no new testimony, nothing. We're memorializing what was said and what was done that night. We're not going back and revisiting.
Okay, Rich?
Just give me a second, I'm going to read what you read.
Okay.
I have a question. So, this is a,
When you expect me to answer, it's fine.
yeah, no. So, am I to assume we're on page 1 that this is going to be considered as like a full house rental, or is this 3 one-bedroom units? How, is there going to be a tax on these rooms? Is it a whole house rental, or is it a room? That's what my little confusion is on this. And also,
We're-
it used to hold 120 people. Is there going to be a maximum occupancy placed on this unit?
I think, the
It
fourth,
says associated into a residential unit for transient boaters
Fourth paragraph.
consisting of a 3-bedroom unit. So it's one unit, not three
That's how-
separate
That's how it was
bedrooms?
described to us.
Oh,
It was
okay.
one unit with 3 separate bedrooms in it.
No cooking facilities or anything else.
I don't mean to open up a can of worms here, Bill, but,
Of course you did.
no, I wanted to clarify.
You should have introduced that to evidence, and we could have, like, went through it then.
Okay.
Like, it's,
Well, I just got it today because I just got this document today, and when I realized that it was in the resolution, I wanted to make sure that we were not setting.
You just got this today? Oh, you just got the
I
resolution
got the
today? yeah.
resolution today, and I just looked at the code, and to me, the zoning ordinance does define and require parking for what they call the tourism guest house thing. And a couple of years ago, the council put botel in that definition. So, I mean, to me, it sounds like botel does have some
Okay,
parking.
Mr. Chairman,
Can I just back up?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
No, go ahead, pardon me.
I thought the end result of our discussion was that a parking space wasn't to be provided for this unit, and that it was going to be a boat that was to park in an existing space that wasn't being utilized by a boat at the time.
that's correct.
So we didn't require a parking space. So I don't know that it was so much a decision that it didn't require a parking space. It was that we didn't require it to have a parking space because the boat was going to be
No.
the dock. And I thought we were making clear somewhere in here that there wasn't to be a parking space for this unit. Am I
Well,
mis-
I only raise it
Remember
because
that?
going forward, I think, and I can stand corrected, and you can do whatever you want, but I think that that sentence in that section 3, whatever it is, that first sentence, it is not accurate.
I do think that, as I read this, Craig, here, take a look at the reg. I do think it, are you looking at it too?
no, I don't have that up yet. I have something for,
I do think that, I read that to mean that there is a parking space for a botel room. That's how I read.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like it's cut and pasted a bit, so I'm going to
Right, no,
quibble a
I-
bit because I can't really tell where section 4 came from because it kind of comes out of nowhere on your document. But it does seem to me that it does contemplate that a botel is like a guest accommodation room and that we have, unless there's something else in the code somewhere else, it says the default position is one space per one of those. But I thought our discussion at the meeting wasn't so much that that there was or wasn't a one parking requirement. It was that because there was going to be a boat in an existing slip.
No, that wasn't my issue. But listen,
Why don't you delete the first sentence and the rest of it's fine?
I mean, that's fine, but
no, I stand corrected, that there obviously is a parking requirement for it. And I missed it.
now, you could easily change this by
But the point
simply
is,
doing.
can we
Who's got
change
my
the
paper?
resolution?
Rich has got it.
Rich, can I have my paper back a minute when you're finished?
Craig, the resolution reflects what?
Well, this is for you guys to decide. I'm just letting you know factual, there is one, and I missed it.
No.
But we didn't, but I was asked whether there was a parking standard for motels. And then I went to the parking section that has all of our required uses, and it has so this is the first time where I've seen
The link,
motels sort of like
linked.
squeezed into the parking calculation for tourist guest house.
Yeah, and I only raise it because I want clarity going forward, and I don't want to throw out this resolution. I think it's the reflection of the mood of the body. That's not a problem. We can fix this by simply saying in number 3, while there is a stated parking requirement in the code, the applicant verifies that, and then blah, blah, blah. And then we can say this site plan waiver acknowledges the affirmation by the applicant.
I would be more comfortable just deleting the sentence.
You would?
Really?
The first sentence.
Yeah, I'm fine just deleting the sentence, because I don't want to make a finding we didn't make at the hearing.
Okay,
But,
fair.
You know, Craig, that is a cut and paste from Craig's report, and Craig himself now says that may have not been accurate.
That's fair.
There's no
That-
sense,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
perpetuating that, but on the other hand, and I have to just slightly disagree, that I do think we addressed the parking issue, and that we specifically contemplated that it would be used as a boat slip was the parking for this, that we said It says, a boatel tied specifically to boats that will be moored in existing slips without an increase in intensity of parking at the site. So I thought that the thrust of the board's decision wasn't so much that there wasn't a parking requirement as it was okay to not have additional parking because it was contemplated to be a boat slip.
Okay, and my only reason for bringing this up is I don't want this to become a confusing document further down the road.
No, that's fine, but I also don't want to contradict what happened at the hearing, and I'm just
I'm not
telling you
doing
that
that. I'm not-
I don't think the critical issue was that we made a decision that parking wasn't required, but rather, we wanted to make sure there wasn't an impact on parking, whether it was required or not, and we found that it wouldn't impact it because it was tied to the boat,
All right.
hotel use.
Is there a motion on the floor
There's not.
No.
to approve this? Is there a motion to approve this?
I thought that there was a motion, but then there was a question.
I still have a question.
There was a motion and a second.
It says a residential unit, so this isn't being treated as a motel with rooms. It's
It says that clearly in here that that's not what we're doing.
it's a three-bedroom residential unit, so he can't rent it out.
It says, let's go through the whole thing. The board accepts as fact that there are no external changes that would affect ingress and egress, and the board acknowledges this appears to be an appropriate hotel use so long as it is clear the three-bedroom unit is not to be used as a residence or hotel, but rather as a boatel tied specifically to boats that will be moored in existing slips without an increase in intensity of parking at the site, and that it is truly transient use as contemplated by the ordinance. And then we say, again later, in the conditions,
There was also other factors, which is what was being converted was would be allowed to handle a party of a lot more people than what
okay,
these.
here, I just keep going. It was agreed by the applicant that the intended purpose and only purpose of this three-bedroom unit is for transient use associated with marina stays, and it is not a three-bedroom residential unit to be leased for other purposes, nor is it to be a residence. That's paragraph 9.
And I think
I think we covered that.
I think we have covered it, and I think that,
Oh, no, but it wasn't your question, it was his.
no.
So I want to make sure he agrees that we covered it.
Yeah, I just wanted a clear definition on it, and also, is there going to be a maximum occupancy put on it?
We have to act as a body on this.
Okay.
So do you agree that that makes that clear, that it's not a residence, that it's not to be leased, that it's for transient use only associated with the marina? Are we comfortable with that?
Yes, I always have been. It's just, it's not rooms, it's one unit that he can rent out, not rooms he's renting out.
No, it's one three-bedroom unit.
Okay.
I think let's make sure it says that.
Because that's where
It says nor is it to be a residence.
It says consisting of a three-bedroom unit,
okay.
right? All right,
Now,
I just read that part.
let me let me get to the bottom, and I'll try and end this if I can. The ordinance, the resolution before us has a site plan waiver in it. The site plan waiver, we all agree it's good. But in the site plan waiver, as long as this document says that the site plan waiver includes the waiver of the parking spaces, because this applicant says you'll never need them, as opposed to saying that the parking is not included because we don't have
Proving
any
what happened
specification.
at that meeting.
Yeah.
You follow, you see the difference?
Dennis, I want to go back. All we're approving is what happened at the meeting that night. We're not parsing or dissecting what
Yeah,
we
you
already.
can't go back and
Well,
revisit
the
the
resolution,
application.
no, I don't want to open up the resolution. The wording of the resolution, to me, if you remove that first sentence, I'm happy.
Make the motion, let's move on.
I'll make the motion, we remove the first sentence and adopt the document with that change.
Second.
Nothing, I was just going to address something else.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Chairman, can I just say one last thing, and that is only that if there is something that the professionals believe would make this more clear, the council would be happy to get any recommendations to clear that up for the future, given that this is the first Botel applicant that we've had. Just
I'm going to say one more thing, just in case anybody ever cares about this. What's different about this one is, see, there was parking already approved for the marina and the boat slips. So that once you're going to put the parking in the boat, once the user is going to be tied to a boat slip, the parking is in there already. It's in the
Yeah, I
ragu.
know, yeah.
All right, so I just don't want you to get the impression that,
Never
so it's
had
not that we're giving a variance without giving a variance. This is approved with the parking and these boat slips, and the user of this is going to be in one of the boat slips. So the parking is in this approval existing, you understand?
Fine.
All right, fine. Go ahead.
I still have one question. What is the maximum occupancy that's going to be allowed?
No,
We can't do that now.
can't do that. We're approving what happened that night, Gary. We can't start applying conditions to it.
So there can still be 120 people in there?
No, it says that part of what they're making the rooms out of was an area that could have accommodated 120 people. What can't accommodate that many now? It's not, it doesn't say how many.
And the fire code will
And the
dictate
parking's
that.
already been approved for the 120, so we're basically,
Fire code.
pardon me?
The fire code. The fire code will dictate.
it'll meet fire
Yeah,
code.
Yeah, correct, and the fire code.
Well, it's like every other three-bedroom unit.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarity on it. That's-
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with clarity. We just got to be careful. We can't, this isn't noticed as a rehearing of the application. So this resolution, we're just voting whether it's consistent with the decision that you made. So we just have to be careful not to start muddying the record for an applicant who's not here.
All right, motion's been made, and
Could you guys tell me who motioned? I'm sorry.
the motion was made to approve the resolution while
As
striking the
amended.
first sentence in paragraph 3 on page 3.
Dennis Crowley was.
Okay, Dennis, and then Mr. Belasco seconded.
Correct.
We have motion by Mr. Crowley, seconded by Mr. Belasco. Mr. Lundholm.
Yes.
Mr. Crowley.
Yes.
Mayor Mullick.
Yes.
Mr. Belasco.
Yes.
Mr. Paducis.
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Becerra.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the second resolution is this new singular wireless PCS 05-24-2022:2. Motion to approve that resolution.
Move.
Second.
Mr. Ludholm seconded.
Motion by Mr. Crowley.
By Mr. Belasco
That-
second. Mr. Belasco second.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Belasco. Mr. Belasco.
Yes.
Mayor Mullick.
Yes.
Mr. Crowley.
Yes.
Mr. Lundholm.
Yes.
Mr. Paducis.
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Becerra.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one application tonight, trustee of the First Presbyterian Church of Cape May, 500 Hughes Street, Block 1048, lots 1.06 and 6.
The tides. Or the tides.
Mr. Monzo, put the mics on if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Anthony Monzo from Monzo Cadenet Siligus, representing the trustees of the First Presbyterian Church of Cape May, 500 U Street, Block 1048, lots 1.01 and 6. With me are Lou Scheit, who's a professional engineer, project engineer for this application, and to my left is Paul Giannolini, who is an elder in the church. I'm not sure what else your position is, Paul. That's it. And he'll answer some questions and provide some testimony regarding the reasons for this application, and Mr. Scheit will go through the technical details and the issues raised by Mr. Hurlis, along with the proofs needed for the variance relief. So you're all familiar with this. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to swear.
You want to swear in the
I
witness?
thought you were about to start. I'm
Okay.
sorry. You're gonna do it. I'm going to get Craig sworn in, too. Gentlemen, if you please raise your right hand, and each of you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, so, but nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes.
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Can you all move your microphones closer, please? It's very hard to hear. Thank you.
Okay, so you're all familiar with this site, right in the center of town. It's a church that's been in existence since the 1800s, I believe, late 19th century when it was built. And adjacent to the church is a parking lot that fronts two streets, Decatur Street to the south and, I'm sorry, to the west, and Columbia to the south. And back, obviously, when the church was built, it wasn't a parking lot, but it has become one over the years. And it's become a problem because this parking lot has been resurfaced many times over the years with crushed concrete, stones, clamshells, you name it, and there's a variety of different surfaces there. There's no real organization to it. Cars park wherever they can fit, and there is an entrance, ingress and egress off of Columbia, but there's very little lighting, there's very poor drainage, and it's really a hazardous condition. So the applicant would like to improve that condition by paving the parking lot, adding some lighting, organizing the spaces. The spaces will remain the same, and it's 24 spaces that currently exist. 24 will remain, and striping it and putting in parking bumpers and some landscaping. And it'll be a much greater look than what it is now, and obviously a lot safer for the people that use it. And the church obviously uses it for its church services. There are events during the week with various community groups that use the church. It houses a food bank, and it also serves when there's no activity in the church. The parking lot serves a need for the public in general because it is used by.
I forgot to tell.
We're not calling each other.
It's used by the public on an honor system where people put donations in the box and they use it. And, you know, I personally have used it many times, but at night it's very, very difficult, especially when it's busy, because you can't really see much in there. And again, there's no organization to it. So with that background, I'd like to first have Mr. Gentilini provide some testimony regarding his position with the church and the purpose for the project, and then Mr. Shett will go into the variances that we're requesting. So, Mr. Gentilini, can you just at least give some overview for the board, your position with the church and the reasons for this application, please?
Yes, so as you said, I'm one of the church elders, and which is pretty much just the council that oversees the operations of the church. And I'm the head of the committee that oversees buildings and maintenance. And it was brought to our attention a few years ago that, you know, with weddings and things like that, that the parking lot is sometimes unusable, especially if it's during a rainstorm, because there's lots of puddles. So we decided to start this project in hopes that it wasn't going to have to go this far, but obviously it has. So, you know, so we've tried to make sure that we're doing everything to improve the look of the place, plus also the you know, the safety. You know, women with high heels, it's hard for them to walk in the parking lot. The standing water is a problem where basically you can't park in pretty much half of the parking spaces. And then in the wintertime, that standing water freezes and becomes a safety hazard. The dust that's created from it, the lighting, as you mentioned, has always been an issue too. So we just felt as though this would be the right move for us to also have a better flow for the whole parking lot. The food closet they have donations and drop-offs, and also they do their distributions, and there's only one entrance into the parking lot currently, so when you pull in, one car might be trying to pull in while another one's trying to pull out, which then somebody has to give way at that point, and that sometimes means a car might have to back out into the street to let the other car out first. So there's just a lot of reasons that we felt that this was the right direction.
And there were photos submitted with the application that show you the current situation with the parking lot. Is it your intent, Mr. Gentilini, to continue to use it in the same fashion in terms of the church, you know, how you're using the church, and also having the parking lot made available for public parking?
Yes, yeah, that's all going to stay the same.
I don't have any further questions. We can go to Mr. Scheid, and then we can address board questions. So, Mr. Scheid, I do not believe has testified before the board, so I'm going to ask him to put his credentials on the record.
Be happy to. I'm a licensed professional engineer since 1977, licensed in New Jersey, and I was licensed in 23 other states. I've testified within New Jersey throughout planning boards throughout the state. And other places. I was founder of a national engineering firm that is now part of the Stantec Corporation, an international firm. And I'm working with Gibson Associates on a part-time basis. Keeps me out of trouble. And I've worked in the engineering industry since 1977, bachelor's in science, civil engineering from Valparaiso, master's from science from Stevens, and courses, a number of courses passed there. Our company did multidisciplined, did subdivisions, site plans, telecommunications, energy, solar.
I think that's sufficient.
Okay. All right.
Can you handle this?
Board accepts Mr. Scheid as an expert.
And I remember my name without looking at my cards.
Okay,
Can I go, I'll go over the site plan just a
sure.
little
Why
bit?
don't you might want to bring it a little closer.
I haven't mastered the easel, so it falls over. I've had that happen a few times. I'll try to put it in the middle. This will be fairly simple. Everyone knows where the Presbyterian Church is. It's on, I'm pointing for the record to the corner of Hughes and Decatur. Nothing changes there. In the rear on Columbia and Decatur, there's a parking area. I'm pointing to the bottom of the plan for the record. And that existing area is a parking area now, and it will be a parking area. There's a buffer of 5 feet, and the setbacks are 5 feet existing now, and we propose will be the same. The lot coverage, which we'll need a variance for, technically correct, but practically, the area that is for parking now is the identical area that will be parking in the future. So the number of parking places, the use, zoning normally talks about being harmonious with the neighborhood. I can say this application is still harmonious with the neighborhood because it predates it. In respect to parking, I did just a little research. The building was built in 1898. Parking back then, the Winton Company was one of the first car manufacturers. They produced 4 cars in 1898. This was built in 1898. My presumption, the planning for it was a few years before that. So I don't think the necessary foresaw the number of cars would be there. Fundamentally, as it operates today, as Paul said, the way we'll operate in the future. So the surface out there is clamshells, gravel. When you walk out there, it's like our blender or DGA subbase. It's like hard as a rock. And the drainage, there's a drainage system out there now. It's called mud puddles. There's about, just after that small rain, there's a dozen out there, and there is no lighting. I've parked there also. I've come down to I live the Jersey Shore. I've lived in New Jersey all my life, at least my primary residence. And the only challenge I ever have coming down here is parking. So I've parked here a few times, and the parking lot's really not in great shape. The things that we're doing basically are 3 simple things. We're going to pave it. So that hard surface will be an even surface. It's rutted, it's uneven, and we'll have we're going to pave it. I think if an application came in and I said, I'm here, I don't want to pave it, I want to just put some marblehead down, you'd say, Lou, I want you to pave it. And if we didn't, I came in and said, I don't have lights on the site plan, you'd say, no, we want some lights on it. So what we're doing is putting lights for safety, we're paving it for safety, and we're putting some on-site drainage. It will be far better than what's there. It doesn't meet the ordinance, but for a constrained site like that's really what we feel the best that we can do for it.
Could you identify the variances that we're asking for?
Yes. Really is the three variances on parking setback require 25, but if they're existing non-conforming. They're 5 feet now, there will be 5 feet. If we try to do 25, we really couldn't get any parking on the site. The other is the coverage. That's a real number that changes, but it's a function of, we only can calculate 50% of the area because it's not paved. And we're at 80 versus 75.
So just to be clear,
Yes.
if you counted 50%, you're below the minimum,
Well,
or maximum,
yes,
I should
yes.
say. And with
When you
it
go to-
paving, you're
We
you're
go a 5%.
5% over.
Over.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you just say that again? I want to make sure I got that in my notes.
The existing, if I could have my, so I can.
You don't have to do anything different than just say it again so I can write
Okay.
it down in a sensible way.
The
I got the 50%.
Ordinance requires 75%. We're at, when we pave the parking lot, we're at 80.8%. And that is non-conforming.
And existing conditions are,
50,
58.9?
58.9, yes.
And that's because you are only counting 50% of it
Right.
because it's not
But if,
paved.
which is technically correct, but practically, it's really not correct. But technically, that is correct. 'Cause it's a very hard surface. The water just lays on top.
Okay, let's go through the variances. Let's take the three setback variances. We'll
Yes.
take them all together because
Sure.
I think the standards are the same. First, can you just articulate the standards for relief under C2 of the municipal land use law, 70C2?
In this case, the benefit so far outweighs the negative, it's almost hard to compare it. We're taking a parking lot, the positive are all safety items. It's having a small on-site drainage system, it's having lighting, it's having paving, that's the only thing we're changing, all of which make it a safer site. The downside is, technically, on the variances, we're not meeting them. On a technical nature. On a practical nature, the parking does exist in those setbacks. And it is a parking lot that really just has analogy would be if this room had painting peeling off the walls and you're painting it. It's really a maintenance function as much as it is a construction function. So there's really minimal detrimental effect, and there's many positive effects.
So no substantial detriment to the public good or to the zone plan?
None whatsoever, in my opinion.
Can you, I would imagine the same testimony would apply with respect to the lot coverage variance, but could you just confirm that and go through
Yes.
that analysis?
The lot coverage is, we are exceeding it. So that's technically 5% the negative. The positive is you have a much safer parking lot. It's paved. And just as the parking lot out here is paved and I actually drove around town, and I think just about every church's parking lot is paved. From the Lutheran church up north to other churches, if there's one that's not, I didn't see it. You certainly know your town better. But typically, we've done many churches in our lifetime. We pave the parking lots because it's safer. Normally people, when they're going to church or they're going to weddings, are in dress shoes, they're not in hiking boots, but they be walking out on the rocks. And paving is a modern standard because it's safer.
The one that you touched on, the drainage, you indicated that we do not meet the ordinance requirements. Mr. Hurlis pointed that out in his review memo. Can you just touch on that waiver and the...
Address the board
Sure.
before you go into that?
Sure.
Yes.
This is something I just want to cue the board into. it's kind of important for us to make sure that we include this information into the resolution. The new stormwater regs require the towns and the engineer to make sure that the applicants are complying with the stormwater requirements for major development. And in this case, this is considered major development. It disturbs more than 5,000 square feet of disturbance. Therefore, it triggers that. Now, specific to that, the DEP audits municipalities now. They check to make sure, okay, how many site plans did you approve? Were the stormwater requirements enforced, et cetera? So in this case, they're asking from a waiver from that standard. And we're allowed to grant waivers, and on page 4 or 5 on the review comments for, and I should say waivers, on design waivers, stormwater management for major developments can be waived to meet minimum stormwater control requirements as defined in the stormwater rule due to site-specific hardships, in that it can be demonstrated that such a waiver would still provide for the protection of local water quality. The applicant is required a system that will reduce overall stormwater volumes but does not meet all of the requirements. So I would just like your testimony to sort of tell us why you can't provide a system, whether it's seasonal high depth of seasonal high groundwater, whether it's site constraints, and then also tell us about how you're controlling the runoff and reducing it so that this board can grant you a waiver.
Be happy to. As I mentioned,
Tony, can you take the microphone with him?
maybe it's, I can just sit down. Might be easier. I really don't need to. There's not much on that site to point to. Everything's pretty much saying the same. Yes. The existing drainage is, as I mentioned, mud puddles and just runoff. There is no water quality whatsoever. There's a fairly high water table there. We looked at a number of different alternatives on the drainage, and what we came up was a small recharge system that utilizes trench grates. So we're going to get below that hard packed surface that would actually get into that sandy area, and that we can do some recharge there, also some storage. We go across basically the whole, where the entrance area is, that whole area. There's a note on the plan shows where that is. For the very small storm, it's a significant improvement than what's there, but we're really constrained by the site. As we talked about, there's a 5-foot buffer, we're maintaining that, but there's no room to put any. If we were to go into the 5-foot buffer, we'd be knocking down all the landscaping, which I'm sure that used to be the Marion, and I just found out a great restaurant I used to go to, no longer, and Queen Victoria. There's no room to put any extra recharge around the parking lot near the building. There's actually paved areas for the handicap. So there's site constraints and there's vertical constraints from the water table. We're able to put a small system in, fairly expensive for the church.
Can you address the impact on the water quality?
It'll absolutely improve what's there now, because what's there now, there's a combination of sheet flow and mud puddles. It'll be a storage system and a recharge system that improves it, and as Craig accurately said, does not meet the full standards, but it's a site that was designed long before municipal land use, long before vehicles, long before me, long before the DEP. And it's a fairly unique site, and we're trying to maintain it. We're paving it for safety, but we're trying to maintain the site as historical as possible.
Can I ask one last question?
Sure.
And just any runoff that's in excess of what your storage system can handle, it doesn't impact any adjoining properties, and is that correctly? It runs into the system that's provided already in the street,
Yes,
correct?
it would go to the same place it goes now.
Okay, so there's
except-
no impact to adjoining properties?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
It goes actually down to the corner where actually across the street's a parking lot.
Thank you.
And that's where the water goes now.
I have no further questions. There are some minor waivers, additional minor waivers that are requested. We can go through them when Mr. Hurlis goes through his report. I believe he supports them, so we can address any of those issues at that time.
Board's pleasure?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I will summarize my report of March 22nd, 2022. So this is an application for preliminary and final site plan approval, as well as the variances and waivers that were described in the applicant's testimony. You've heard description of the improvements that are proposed to the parking area. And I agree, this is a non-delineated parking lot with one access. They're improving it. They're providing one-way flow through that with angled parking spaces. So it involves the reconfiguration of parking spaces, the paving surface, the lighting of that, the appropriate delineation. So it certainly improves it. I'll roll into the completeness review. The certified list of property owners, the updated list has been provided, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that item was the only outstanding item. Under the site plan checklist, items 3F, K, V, W, Z, all of those, based on the nature of this application, we supported the waivers from those requirements. So if there's no questions, I did recommend deeming that complete. Moving on to the zoning review. The applicant described their variances, and I'll summarize those. They're increasing lot coverage over the required maximum of 75%. They indicated 58.9% is existing, and they're proposing 80.8%. That's a little deceiving because it's a hard-packed surface. It is essentially covered now, but based on our definitions that don't exactly mesh with stormwater calculations, it's an increase to 80.8%, so there's a variance necessary. And then there's the parking setback requirements. There's 25-foot setback requirements from all of the streets. So on Decatur, Columbia, and they also is a side yard setback of 25 feet where they're providing 5-foot setback for all 3 of those yards. So those are the 4 variances that are required. We talked about the design waiver, which was from meeting all of the stormwater requirements of major development, and based on the testimony, I believe the board can find that waiver is acceptable. Moving on to the general review comments, item number 1 is just notice that there's slate sidewalk abutting this site. It's historic, the city likes to save it, we want to preserve it. So they have to take the precautions necessary to preserve that and make sure that with the driveway relocations, when that happens, the slate sidewalk is put back in the appropriate manner. Item 2 is our standard requirement whenever you have new driveways. Sometimes there's restriping necessary, so they have to get approval from the Streets and Roads Department and comply with any requirements within the city right-of-way. 3 is the standard requirement of providing the performance guarantee and inspection escrow. And 4 is tied to that, and that requires that the certificate of occupancy or acceptance of improvements is tied to a satisfactory inspection. Item 5 is compliance with the requirements of the Cape May Shade Tree Commission, and I'm going to go and expand on that. The Environmental Commission, Fire Department, Police Department, and Shade Tree Commission reports that we received. There were some notes, or it was approved with conditions from the environmental have you seen those?
Yeah, we take no exception with
Okay, so that they should be a condition of approval.
We're happy to change those.
Okay, so there was, if you haven't seen those, they're recommending substitution to more native species with the landscaping, which is always a good thing. And then the Shade Tree Commission had approved with following conditions, and they're worried about the roots that could be damaged when the sidewalk improvements are done. So do you have any issues with that?
I did not see the Shade Tree Commission report,
Okay.
but we don't have any exception with that. I'm sure we got it, Karen, I just haven't seen it, so,
It
okay.
said no existing tree or hedge are to be removed.
That's my belief on the plan,
Okay.
that there isn't any
And then it
call
says
for it.
care to be taken to not adversely affect the root areas. So those
And
were
we have
the
a note about the slate also.
Okay. So those are recommended to be conditions of approval. Let's see here. Okay. Project is located in the historic district. I'm not sure if it's applicable, but they should get either HPC approval or something from them that says that HPC review is not that is not necessary. 8 is our standard condition that they have to comply with any and all applicable affordable housing requirements, if they're even required on this. I doubt they are. And then after approval has been granted, the applicant is required to revise the plans to address conditions of approval and submit 6 sets of compliance plans, revised and satisfactory for review. One last topic of discussion, and I'm not sure whether this applies or not, but one of our board members, through our secretary, they're not here tonight, but they asked if the make-ready electric spaces are required on this site. Now, the timing of this application has something to do with this, because that ordinance was initially put in section 52549. It was repealed and then put back in section 52589. And that section says, as a condition of preliminary site plan approval for each application involving a, whoops, somehow I just jumped to the wrong section. My bad, sorry. I'm reading from section 52589D2. As a condition of preliminary site plan approval, each application involving a parking lot or garage not covered in subsection D1, and D1 is what I started reading, but that essentially addresses residential uses. A, install at least one make-ready parking space if there will be 50 or fewer off-street parking spaces. So they're required to provide one make-ready space because they're under 50 parking spaces. Now, that's if it's applicable. We're a time of application, filing of the application. I'm not sure if the rescinding of the one ordinance affects that, but I'm sure Mr. Monzo and I can go through that as to whether it's appropriate. But I would recommend that that be a condition of approval if it applies.
What about, is this the creation of a parking lot
Yeah, I thought that, my understanding,
as opposed to a
It says,
reconfiguration?
I'm going to read it. Each application involving a parking lot or garage not covered in subsection D1 above shall.
When was what was the effective date of the ordinance?
That I don't have, so that's what we have to look up. Because there was an ordinance, and then it was rescinded and replaced with another one. So, and I don't know what, your timing is pretty close to when that happened.
Doesn't that allow more parking spaces if you have one of those? Wasn't there some?
Oh, you get a credit, you get 2-for-1 credit.
So if somebody wanted to install lights on a parking lot that didn't have lights before,
This is coming from the state. This
Yeah.
is with a gun to our head, we
I
said
understand, I'm trying to understand that. I mean,
Yes.
so if someone's putting lights on a parking lot, they'd have to do the make-ready stuff?
that's what this ordinance says.
Is that what it says? It says,
Yes.
an application, what does it say, for a parking lot?
As a condition of preliminary site plan approval, which we're granting, each application involving a parking lot or garage not covered in
Right,
subsection
so is this
D1.
this is involving a parking lot?
This is involving a
So they're
parking lot.
changing the egress from it, it would require that?
I'm just telling you what it says.
But granting waivers is
Craig.
is one of them that can be waived?
This is a state requirement.
my understanding of this is for parking lots that are created. This is an existing parking lot. It's not like a retroactive situation to existing parking lots. Like if someone were coming in to top a parking lot, or somebody was coming in to provide improvements to existing parking lot.
Are they really gonna have people tearing up existing parking lots to bury wires to make a make-ready spot for changing lighting or egress? It doesn't, is that what it wants to do?
I need to look at it as well. It doesn't sound right to me, but we can look
Can-
at it.
can you
First
read
question
that
is,
again,
does it
Craig?
apply? The second
Can you read
question
that
is-
first part again?
So I'm.
Preliminary site-
Subsection D, and
Right.
I'm going to start, this is requirements for new installation of EVSE and make-ready parking spaces, okay? And then subsection 1 says a condition of preliminary site plan approval, and that goes through the requirements for residential uses. So I'm going down to subsection 2. which says, "As a condition of preliminary site plan approval, each application involving a parking lot or garage not covered in subsection D1 above shall, A, install at least one make-ready parking space if there will be 50 or fewer off-street parking spaces."
Okay? This property is located in a residential zone,
Correct.
right?
Yep, RS.
So then, I mean, I don't consider a church commercial use, quite frankly, but if it's in a residential zone, that applies when you're talking about commercial parking lots.
Yeah, and also, I would add to that, you're right, Bill, and the code doesn't provide as a use by right of a commercial parking lot in an RS zone. It doesn't require that. It doesn't provide it. It only provides them in commercial zones.
See, Craig,
This doesn't have
the
any-
issue that I have with it being existing parking lot, and I don't claim to be an expert in this, I passed 2 of these ordinances in 2 different towns, but I thought the idea was the concept of pre-wiring, in the sense that you're running stuff.
Yes.
When you're building the parking lot, you're running wires and conduits and getting it make-ready for new EV, to me, to start tearing up parking lots, because it involves a parking lot, to start tearing up existing paving and sites because it involves a parking lot, to me, doesn't make sense. I thought
You're
engineering
preaching
wise.
to the choir. I am not a big fan of this one. I'm serious.
I think,
The only reason I'm bringing this up is because another person raised this before the meeting today, so I had to at least talk about it. So,
Well, Craig, the issue turns on whether or not this is a public parking lot, which I think the testimony said it has been.
now, there's different requirements for public parking lots.
Well,
It turns on whether or not this involves a parking lot, and whether that is, when it says involves a parking lot, does it mean a creation of a parking lot or changing existing parking lot? Now granted, this one is gravel, and they haven't paved it yet, so under my theory, if you haven't paved it yet, then I guess you should be able to run the wires easier. But we know that this is like a hard surface, but
Well, could I ask a quick question? So I'm just not familiar with what this, what's it?
Electric,
It's for, so they want you to pre-wire for an electric
I-
vehicle
I have ours. Ours is based
charging
off that.
station. So, like, is there another requirement to go with that, that it's only, if that parking space would only be restricted to EV vehicles, or can any vehicle park in that parking space?
the way ordinance
My
reads,
understand-
it's restricted to an EV parking.
Yes.
lot.
My understanding, when you have dedicated EV, I also have another hat, I sit on the planning board, actually tonight, but I told him Cape May takes precedent over. And I got laughs there too, so I'm doing pretty good, I'm gonna stop there. But the applications we did, like Wawa's, once, there was one that had a parking challenge, and then we were adding like 8 Tesla.
stations.
They're dedicated. You lose 8 parking spaces.
Yep.
And the other thing is, my understanding of this, it's not a clear regulation that came down from the state. It is not. And one of the problems is that it's like pre-wiring a building, because you don't know, are you going to put Tesla? There's going to be different electric vehicles like Beta, VHS, that type of thing. There's that problem. But my understanding is it was for new parking lots going in, not anything on a retroactive
I
basis.
agree with that. but
And
I'm
we're
not
like,
sure I
we're
agree with
quasi.
that, I'm just not sure this isn't a new parking lot, in the sense that it's not already paved, so it's.
I agree with
like
you.
Changing the lights example, really, it's not really this, it's not
Right.
paved yet. Tearing up new parking lots makes no sense to me, but this isn't really paved.
We're
yet,
not,
so
right, it hasn't been,
But
probably
it is
should
an
apply.
existing parking lot.
Well,
we're not creating
But what
a new
is a parking lot, in the sense that it's, it's not virgin soil, I agree.
but it is a parking.
It's a place where people park, it is that, but it's not really a.
I have a question.
Sure, Dennis.
For Craig. If this building contains a church and a parking lot, if the parking lot were purely and solely the off-street parking for the church, would they still have to put an EV in there?
I think so.
Say that again?
If the parking lot were purely and simply the off-street parking spaces dedicated to the church's participants, it's for the church only, would they have to put an EV in there?
This,
I don't think there's any.
the trigger here is
It's like,
condition of preliminary site plan. That's what's triggering this.
They want electric charging
Yeah,
stations in
this
parking
is-
lots.
This
That's
is
that's what they
them
want.
hammering
Yeah.
towns to force people to put these in.
But my question is, if it's just their private lot for their private use, would they have to do that?
The use does not matter. It's
use-
triggered by the site plan approval.
Wow.
Even like a small apartment.
I think the first thing we need to look at is the effective date of the ordinance compared to the time of the application submission under the time of application rule. I have a date of December, Greg, of the submission.
That's what I looked at your.
And the
December.
ordinance took effect January 18th of 2022.
So,
So,
so there you go. So like I said, I knew you were close.
Well,
So it's a moot point.
I think it's a moot.
What are the dates?
The ordinance is amended, it says January 18, 2022. And the date of the application, give me 1 second.
Your December 20th is when the stamp was.
December 8th. Well, December 20th when it got, yeah, I signed it on December 8th.
You were stamped in December 20th.
Well, when was the old one moved?
That was under a different section. It was 52549
And when was that rescinded?
when this one was.
So they were one or the other. I mean, I don't know, or were they
Yeah,
not?
can we just
I
make
guess
it
the
a
one they were
condition
under
of,
was rescinded, so I'll go
I don't-
with that. I mean,
can you make it a condition of approval if?
That's what I
the date's
said, is
still in?
if it's applicable, it's applicable. If it's not, it's not.
Right.
So if it was applicable, does that mean you'd have to go back and redo your plan to put an electric?
Well, so my question would be, is, as a private parking lot that can restrict
the use doesn't matter.
who comes in or not,
They don't
do-
care.
right, so does the electric parking space have to be made available to anyone at no charge, or can?
No. You can charge.
still charge.
And enforcement of that space would really be on you as a
Okay, that was
private.
my next question. would be
Right.
Who would
Here's-
say that if somebody just came in and parked in that
We're not
spot?
going to be ticketing your parking lot.
Right, okay.
Here's the definition of
Pre-wired,
make-ready parking space.
It has to be pre-wired for, it doesn't actually have to have the terminal.
I'm going to give you the definition of make-ready parking space. The pre-wiring of electrical infrastructure at a parking space or set of parking spaces to facilitate easy and cost-efficient future installation of electric vehicle supply equipment or electrical vehicle service equipment, including but not limited to Level 2 EVSE and direct current fast chargers. Make-ready includes expenses related to service panels, junction boxes, conduit wiring, and other components necessary to make a particular location able to accommodate electric vehicle supply equipment or electric vehicle service equipment on a plug-and-play basis. Make-ready is synonymous with the term charger-ready.
But it doesn't give you what the minimum requirement is, because a stage 3, a level 3 charger would require different electricity than a level 2 charger.
I think for the site plan portion, it's really conduit.
All
Yeah.
right, so the first thing when the board needs to
The civil
decide-
part,
Let's
the
try to get
civil.
to some decision-making. The first thing you have to decide is the fact that when they applied on December 20th, 2021, there was an ordinance that was later rescinded and replaced with a different ordinance. So the board has to make a decision whether or not that rescinded ordinance should apply to this or not. We can't apply the new one, that came after they applied. So the first decision the board has to make is whether this application, which happens to be one that was applied for December 20th, that ordinance that would have applied to this one was rescinded. So why doesn't the board decide if there is a make-ready ordinance that applies to this particular application due to that timing?
So we need to see, just need to see the ordinance itself.
Yeah, I don't know what changes were made.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's similar, but different.
But what, in a sense, what does it matter?
Well, because the ordinance will show you what was changed from the prior ordinance, and whether it was a carryover or whether it was a repeal, and then the adoption of a new ordinance, which is what Craig had alluded to. So I think the ordinance language may.
Anthony, it was rescinded in whole and replaced,
That's what I think it was. I'm being told
which
it was
means
rescinded and replaced.
that in that moment of time, that law no longer exists.
It wasn't in a.
Was it just
it wasn't
changed
in-
in terms of the captioning, or did they?
I think,
want to get another?
I think we, if I remember correctly, which is probably not, but I think we added some HPC element to it, and that's it, I
There's an
think.
HPC element to it.
Right. But I think the point is, it was rescinded at the time and not in effect. Right?
What I'm being told is that they applied, and there was an ordinance in effect, and that ordinance was rescinded. And then a ordinance that's similar but slightly different was put in its place.
I don't think it was in effect. I don't think it had gone through the full process.
I don't know if the first one was in full effect.
I don't think it was in effect. It was quick.
So the ordinance may have been amended before it was adopted.
Correct.
And introduced, amended, and then adopted with
I
amendment.
believe so, and it definitely wasn't.
That's why we need to see the ordinance, because it'll lay out the history.
Maybe we don't. All right, so let's say this. So why don't we say if it, as a condition of approval, there'll be a determination made whether there was an ordinance in effect when they applied. If there was, they need to comply with it. But if it wasn't, then they don't. And then you and Craig can figure that out. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep, makes sense.
Okay?
And I apologize to the applicant because I'm not a big fan of that ordinance and how it occurred. And you can see the language in there, it's not very clear. A lot of towns are going to struggle with that language.
Okay, so whatever motion is made, one of the conditions of approval will be, Mr. Monzo, Mr. Hurlis, and if I am, if you need me as well, will decide if there was an ordinance in effect at the time the application was made. If it was, then they'll work with Mr. Hurlis to comply with it. If it wasn't, then we don't have to worry about it. Okay?
One last question, and Mr. Gentilini just brought this to my attention. His intent was that the landscaping that was previously along Columbia was removed a few years back, and that same landscaping with a lot of those old overgrown, half-dead yew bushes and everything else that goes along Decatur Street, they would like to put the same landscaping that they're putting on Columbia. So they basically want to dress up the landscaping, and to the extent we need the Shade Tree Commission or the Environmental Commission, we'll just follow the same criteria. In fact, we can use the same landscaping that the Environmental Commission suggested for Columbia, and you just put the same landscaping along Decatur.
And basically, I
With
looked
the
at
same conditions
Yeah.
about roots and things like that, impacting.
They're recommending specific species. If they're
Right.
replacing that with those specific species, I don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, basically, what they recommend is not really changing the landscaping plan, but changing the species. So we totally, different types of grass, different types of daisies, different types of boxwood, holly instead of boxwood, and we just want to carry that around. Queen Victoria, that hedge is in a little better shape, but over on Decatur, I think having it uniform, it would be far better. And Craig, you don't have a problem with it?
No problem. I support that request.
So that's pretty much it.
Okay. Craig, you still,
Thank you.
you're done? Okay, question?
I just have one question. So out of the 4 variances, with the exception of the 5% lot coverage difference, do the other 3 exist currently?
Practically speaking.
And I had a question too. On one of the plans, and I can't find it now, but is there a diagram of a sub basin under the parking lot?
Yes, it's
Am I right or wrong? Does that go partially under another piece of property?
Oh, absolutely not.
No?
Absolutely
All right.
not. We could never do that.
Yeah, all right.
I didn't look, but you're going to have lighting, I'm assuming, on the Queen Victoria side of the property?
Both sides.
That's going to be shielded?
Yes. We tried to just do a single off the building, and it just really wouldn't reach. And then we have it on either side, and it's shielded, so it just goes, and
Okay.
it covers the lot fairly well without going onto the street, whatever the Marion's called now, or
Cricket
Queen
Club.
Victoria.
Cricket Club.
The what?
Cricket Club.
Cricket Club? It'll take me 5 years to stop calling it the Marion.
I just should have another question, if I may. And I hope we can resolve this, because I don't know. This parking lot is in an RS zone, which does not permit public parking lots. Is there a variance needed for that, or is there a grandfather piece or something? Because it's never been approved as a parking lot.
Craig?
You're talking about public parking lots.
Right.
So this is, the way that I look at this is the parking for the church that's also used as public parking. The primary function is for the church,
Totally.
and it's also used as public parking. So I don't know that we're approving it as public parking. I mean, if you're saying it's not a permitted use, then this board has no jurisdiction, it shouldn't even be here.
Well, yeah, that's
Well, no,
why.
I'll come at it a slightly different way. They're not expanding a non-conforming use. I mean, so either it's been used this way since.
That's what
time immemorial.
I was hoping for a grandfather kind of a thing, but
It is. If they were expanding a parking lot and adding to it, that might be a different thing. We'd have to really look at that, but I think it's been used, churches are by nature public accommodations, so I think it's always been that way, that I'm sure it's always been used for public parking when the church isn't using it.
right.
So, and they're simply paving it, so they're not expanding it, they're just making it safer. So I don't view that as a expansion of a non-conforming use that would require a variance. So I think it's, in this instance, it's kind of moot.
Okay, I was looking to maybe to protect them from someone who would say, why is a parking lot in an RS zone? So,
Hopefully I just protected them a little bit. All right, what else we got?
Any other questions? Okay,
Go ahead.
open up to the public. All right, then, hearing none, we vote on the entire application with the variances? Anybody care to make a motion to
Yeah,
that?
and that, when you say public parking, all of that goes to the church, right?
Yes, well, the parking lot is closed essentially during like church services.
I mean, you don't lease it to a private company to.
No, it's a donation to the church that's made,
Okay, that's
yes.
good. All right.
okay.
Just to distinguish in case we get another one later, I want to.
And then there's a sign on the property that says this is not a public parking lot. I don't know what that means, but,
Because it's not open to the public all the time.
except you can park there if you,
Well, if you're paying, I mean,
I think the donation sign's fine all by itself, frankly.
All right, we got this. All
Work.
right,
All right.
we'll make a motion for something bad happens.
yeah. Somebody care to make a motion to approve the site plan with?
I'll make a motion, we,
Second.
with the wording about
The motion I'd recommend being made is a motion to grant preliminary and final site plan approval with associated waivers, as well as variances for lot coverage, parking within setbacks Decatur, parking within setbacks Columbia, parking within setbacks side yard, with particular attention to the waiver for the stormwater issues that were addressed by the board engineer and the expert.
And with the,
And
with the condition about
There's
the,
also the make-ready condition that we discussed, which is if there's an ordinance in effect at the time of the application that applies, then they will comply, but if the ordinance wasn't in effect at the time of the application, then they will not have to comply. That'll be worked out between Mr. Monzo and Mr. Hurlis, and also some discussions, conditions about the Environmental Commission and the Shade Tree Commission, that whatever replacements they make will be species acceptable to them in their letters. Okay, that's the motion I recommend being made, but how you vote is up to you.
I think Rick just made that.
I make the motion,
And I
the
second.
attorney's recommendations.
Motion by Mr. Lundholm, seconded by Mr. Jones. Mr. Belasco.
Yes.
Mayor Mullick.
Yes.
Mr. Crowley.
yes,
Mr. Lundholm.
Yes.
Mr. Paducis.
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Becerra.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Best of luck.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice project. Good luck.
Thanks.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.